What is the Mandela effect, and is it real? That's the question. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. And welcome to those listening to my channel for the first time, and hopefully not the last. And thanks to those loyal subscribers as well. Okay, so the Mandela effect got its name because it's basically the first event that quite a few people came to the agreement that circumstances were a little peculiar, to say the least. That Nelson Mandela had actually died during his prison sentence. People believe he never was released, which doesn't make sense to me because I distinctly recall his being released from jail in the late 80s, and that he had spent a total of 27 years in prison. Now, I clearly remember this because I actually remember thinking at the time when I was, carry the one, 15 at the time. How could I not have known about this man before his release when he had suffered so long in prison without even knowing it? Now, you recall the time when first joining, say, Facebook, and you started catching up with classmates, noticing that they had children who were nearly adults already, when you were just starting to have some of your own. I remember thinking, man, they grew up fast. But I only thought that way because I wasn't around to see their kids growing up all those years. That's how I felt when seeing Mandela released. Now, at that point, he had been in prison almost twice as long as I'd been alive. But it went by so quickly, right? Not for him. Only for those who didn't have to endure it. See my point? Anyhow, how would I have a memory of his total time in prison, much less him becoming the president of South Africa a few years later, if he died in prison? Now, could his release from prison have given them the false memory that it was a funeral procession of some kind? That it was just on television in the background while they were doing something else, so it was essentially white noise? But how could they not recall his winning the presidency 5 years later? Fiona Broome is one of the first people credited with coining the term Mandela effect in 2009. Now, that in and of itself is odd. Now, I don't know about you, but when I hear of a public figure dying and I think, man, that's weird, I thought they'd already died years ago, that's what triggers my believing they're already dead. Fiona, however, created her MandelaEffect.com site in 2009, 4 years before Mandela died at the age of 95 on December 5th, 2013. So what triggered her memory of his death when he hadn't even died yet? Just a simple conversation? Anyway, another common belief is that David Soul of the 70s Starsky and Hutch fame had committed suicide in the 80s due to being depressed over his wife succumbing to cancer. Now imagine their surprise when seeing his cameo appearance in the 2004 film starring Owen Wilson as Hutch and Ben Stiller as Starsky. What if another celebrity had a wife that had cancer and not David Soul's? Now, where's the link to those two to mistake one for the other, you're asking? That's a good question. How about David's last name, Soul? Could David have been in the news around the same time as the other celebrity suicide, and a commonly used phrase when a public figure is mentioned is God rest his soul? Or suicide is the ultimate sin, so the person's soul goes to hell? Or he was a troubled soul? Could that have been how people subconsciously associated the two men together? After all, saying anything enough times, it begins to stick. Okay, so another one of the Mandela effect scenarios that I just can't wrap my head around is that numerous people could swear that America had 52 states at one time. Now, some think that they could be confusing it with the number of cards in a deck. However, some claiming 52 states seem to recall that that's exactly how they remembered how many states there were. Well, how about the number of weeks in a year? The states they said to have remembered that are no longer included are DC, which isn't a state but rather a district, hence the DNDC, essentially acting as its own country, like the Vatican, and why we have been under its organic constitution since 1871 without most people even knowing it, effectively making all of us a corporation of the large corporation of the United States. Hint, DC is supposed to have its own laws, not spill over to the 50 states. 50 states, never 52. Ever since Hawaii came into the fold in 1959 as the 50th state to join the Union, sealing the flag with a gold fringe, thanks to Eisenhower. And the other state they recall, Puerto Rico. Huh? Puerto Rico? Now exactly what year did Puerto Rico join the Union? Maybe that's why the IRS is headquartered there. Just saying. Anyway, now I didn't pay much attention to the whole Mandela effect until I'd recently watched a very popular movie from the mid-80s and saw a perfect example of it with my own eyes. Now, I'm sure most of you had watched this blockbuster movie too, if not several times. Even if you weren't born back then, it's still that popular. And still one of my favorites because it takes me back to one of only a few decent childhood memories. But that's for another video or an autobiography. In any event, check out this clip and see if you can determine any oddities that weren't in the first release over 30 years ago. Now, I'd about spit out my drink all over the coffee table by sheer shock when I was watching it.
Hey, puto! There she is, man. There's a bitch. Shit, man. Son of a bitch. She cheating, man. Hey, bitch. No homeboy for her tonight, man.
See what I mean? They changed the entire script. Okay. Needless to say, that was from a blooper reel of Back to the Future. Now, you don't think I'd get a copyright strike of a movie's blooper reel, do you? I guess we'll find out. Okay, so after saying all that, you can probably guess what side of the argument I'm taking on the whole Mandela effect angle. And you wouldn't be more wrong. All kidding aside, yes, the Mandela effect is very real. Now, Sherry Schreiner had said it's due to the dimensions merging, which is just another sign that we are definitely in the end times. As the Bible states, in the end times, after Yahuah has broken the sixth seal, the veil will be lifted, where the sky is rolled up like a scroll. The Mandela effect is proof that that has already started happening. Now, Sherry had said she'd even seen signs that has affected the Bible, and that specific words have changed, even in hard copies that are in our homes, not just Bible apps or internet sites, but right on our bookshelves. Now, she stated, which I'll include the transcript so you can follow along, as well as include the links in the description. Listen to what she has to say.
Now, maybe a lot of them are fooled. Maybe a lot of them have been hoodwinked, because I know how Lucifer lies to people, and they don't know what their real history is because he's lied to them about it. And he does this all the time. You've seen it with your own eyes with Mandela effect, how they can just change words. I mean, I had a whole case of Bragg's apple cider vinegar, and in one instance, every label turned into Bragg. And you saw what they did to Kellogg's cereal boxes and movie things, and nothing escaped them. If they wanted to target a change, a reversal, just to mess with you and show you what they can do, they did it. And we call it the Mandela effect. And they've been doing that for a long time. They change history, they change the Bible, they take words out of the Bible, change the Bible. Nothing has been immune from their touch. So a lot of these fallen angels, a lot of these Lemurians, All these tall whites and fallen offspring of the fallen, they don't even know who they are. They've all been given a fake history. Fake histories. They don't know who they are, and they've been lied to. And so maybe they really do think they're doing the world a favor by bringing in this global peace. I'll tell you who does know the truth. The very ones who are leading them along by the noses. Sananda, Maitreya, Eve. She goes by so many names. The whole Ashtar command. They know the truth. And then they just lead the others along. Telos and all, City of Telos and Shambhala and all the other Lalars. They lead them along because they need them. It's actually just this huge war between Lilith's kids and Lucifer's. And those two just sit in the background and laugh, see whose kids can win. They don't care because Lucifer wins at the end. Because he's over all of them. He ends up in the lake of fire, so how much is he winning, For change things, he had his way. And now you're seeing the same thing with the Mandela effect. The Mandela effect is changing words and passages in the Bible. The whole point of putting it in writing was that so people could memorize it and have the words of the Bible written on their heart, meaning they have it memorized. And so that was the whole point of why the Jewish scribes would write scrolls and books. And it was the collection of all these different letters that not the Jews put together, but the Greeks and the Romans. It's like I posted on my Facebook the other day, Mary wasn't Catholic, and Jesus wasn't Protestant, folks. They were Jewish. And they weren't even Jewish. That term didn't even exist back then. They were Judahites. The Bible talks about the veil being lifted and dimensions merging. And this is what this whole Mandela effect thing that's coming out is in regards to. Because CERN is punching portals and gateways to bring in dimensional beings so we don't see them coming in. They're invisible to us because they're bringing in fifth dimensional beings. They're stashing them in various places, putting them all wherever they can hide them for now, because when it's time, they're going to unleash all those creatures onto the world. It's going to be like a sudden ambush, like an ambush. And you can expect that to happen around the time they start enforcing Satan's mark on the world. By the time they start enforcing that, they'll unleash all the creatures. So this Mandela effect with the dimensions starting to merge is what has everybody hyped and freaking out about, making videos all over the place. Because the Bible talks about the dimensions merging and the veil being lifted in the last days. And when the dimensions merge and the veil is lifted, you're going to be able to see with your physical eyes beings from other dimensions that you could never see before. It was kept away and hidden from us because they were dimensional beings, so they were invisible. But when the veil is lifted, that invisibility is gone. You're going to see them. You're going to be very visible. So you're going to see ugly creatures, demons. But the flip side of it is you're going to see angels too. So it's not all bad, even though it's going to be mostly bad and ugly, because demons and fifth-dimensional beings are usually basically pretty ugly. But you'll also be able to see angels too, so that's pretty cool.
Now, as I'd mentioned in my superheroes video, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse was about just that, merging dimensions, where all versions of Spider-Man meet up in the same dimension. It's about how the CERN Hadron Collider is causing it to happen by opening portals. But just because the Bible, specifically in Revelation, says things are going to happen, now that doesn't mean Father Yahuah is simply going to snap his fingers and it happens. He allows for the enemy to rise up against those who are not his, or are his, but are under judgment because they're not following his law, the Torah law. Now, they may think they're his, but if they're not following his law, they're under judgment because they haven't tested the spirits. They are being deceived, as the Bible tells us in 1 John chapter 4, verse 1, which I believe is happening to Jonathan Kleck. Now, I won't go into that too much, but I will say this. I do believe he believes what he's saying is actually from God. And he might very well be serving a purpose for Father, as Trump is, and other world leaders who aren't his is. But that doesn't mean Kleck's hearing from him. Have you ever heard of the expression dark versus false light? That essentially is a two-headed coin, where no matter who you speak with, as in channeling spirit guides, they are all evil, merely playing good cop, bad cop role to deceive anyone they can convince to meditate and channel through, and ultimately soul scalp so they can take over their body. Now, as I'd mentioned in my superhero anagram video, if you'd seen the recent horror film Get Out, Jordan Peele's Get Out, that's exactly what Jordan is portraying, soul scalping, where the host is kicked out of the driver's seat and sent to the quote-unquote sunken place, which is the astral realm, as in the fifth dimension. And the host can see what's happening, but can't do anything about it. Even those quote-unquote spirit guides could be serving a purpose for Father. Heck, Lucifer, his biggest puppet of all, is serving a purpose for him by testing his children's faith. Now, as I've explained before, Father Yahuah uses everything for his purpose, as he's created dark, light, good, and evil. Everything he's created. He is the creator of everything. Now, I believe Kleck was stood up to offset Sherry's ministry, which he doesn't seem to care for. After all, those are the two primary people online for the last decade that awakened people had started listening to. But it was typically either or, and most had clearly chosen Kleck if you know the huge disparity between each of their subscriber numbers. And as I had explained in my Prophet versus Prophet video, his channel grew leaps and bounds faster than Sherry's, despite being created years later, because he had all the bells and whistles included and has always stayed the course regarding Paul being a genuine apostle. He's even constantly comparing his journey with Paul's, as in coming from the darkness into the light, which is the definition of the Freemasonry oath. So who will most gravitate toward between those two ministries? Well, the one who is following what they've grown accustomed to through the church, naturally. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying Kleck's a Mason by any means. I'm just comparing his journey to Paul's, who was most certainly a Freemason, like his dad, a Roman government official. Paul was Jewish on his mother's side, not his father's. And when she died early in his life, some even say while giving birth to him, he grew to resent women, which is very prominent in his 13 books. Sherry, on the other hand, and as I've stated numerous times before, and I'll keep saying it, she told the truth point blank, never focusing on one area to distract her audience away from another, as so many disclosure agents do, no matter how depressing her ministry sounded. She never put a spin on her ministry in order to make it sound like the future was more promising than it really is, in order to maintain her audience. She even went over to the other side of the veil, which I've yet to see anyone else do, because she was Father's true mouthpiece in these last days. And that didn't sit well with most because they hold on to what they've been taught through, you guessed it, generational indoctrination for everything it's worth. And that's what freaked a lot of people out about her ministry and ultimately tagged her with the quote-unquote crazy lady online. Sure, these disclosure agents like Alex Jones, David Icke, Steve Quayle are providing valuable information and exposing evil. But to what degree? And why do they refuse to go down certain topic paths, or do but don't follow through with them? It's all part of the truth and disclosure phase we are currently in. And again, why draining the swamp is just that. Lucifer exposing his own people before anyone else in order to make room for what's coming. Now, I truly believe that most people are not meant to awaken right now. But that doesn't mean we can't plant seeds along the way for them to recall later, when things really start getting bad. Now, without Sherry, we would have been hard-pressed to stand a fighting chance with all the deception, manipulation, modification in this corrupt world. And that's exactly what the Mandela effect is, the changing of history. Now, as I've stated before, you either believe she is who she said she was, or you don't. She was absolutely necessary in these final days to bring Father's people back to him. And that's exactly what he'd ask of her. And she'd done, essentially staying on the track of what's taught in the Bible, aside from the lies I've already mentioned in other videos. Despite everyone else going off the track and going with the flow or changing of history, which is referred to as, again, the Mandela effect. Now, notice I didn't say without people like Sherry, because nobody was like Sherry in this day and age. Most people that had run across her site claimed she was the leader of a dark cult. They don't realize that she was sent here to awaken Father's army, not create one. Big difference. Her ministry was to sound the alarm for those who were sent here for a specific purpose in these end days. Her ministry either resonated with you or it didn't. Simple as that. Now, most people will only believe what they can see or told is real. Basically, someone else having to think for them when it's not staring them in the face. With the exception of believing in a higher power, of course, because that takes faith. Now, I'm not at all surprised by some of the comments and emails I've received on this topic. They define what a sheeple does. Of course, they will probably say that that isn't even a word. Oh, but it is. They've just probably never looked it up because of being too busy being the definition of one to know it even existed. Sort of like how right-handed people had never noticed just how few left-handed desks there actually were in any given classroom setting. They never took the time to notice because, in both cases, they are the majority. And the majority is rarely ever the wrong group to be in, if ever, right? Tell me something. If that's the case, then why is there a countless number of martyrs awaiting under the altar in Revelation 6:9 after the fifth seal is broken? Assuming they've ever cracked open a Bible to know what I'm even talking about, and don't simply rely on someone else reading it to them on Sun God Day, like most Christians do. And that's presuming they're not atheists. Roughly, there are 2 billion Christians in the world. Now, do you think they think that minority or the majority of all those under the altar are Christians? Let's break it down in both scenarios, okay? Now, if 2 billion Christians is the minority of those heading to heaven, and keep in mind, this time around, only one-third will remain faithful to Father, as opposed to the 2/3 during the angelic civilization. That means they don't know much about the gospel of the kingdom, as opposed to the much more popular gospel of grace deception, spearheaded by Paul in his 13 books, that are typically preached on Sun Worship Day. If they're the majority, that means only a few in the grand scheme of the big picture were removed from the planet before the tribulation started. Now, in one case, you have a clear majority seemingly in the wrong in their indoctrinated beliefs. Otherwise, they would have been included in the much smaller rapture than the church teaches and Hollywood depicts, right? And in the other case, well, the only way 2 billion people would ever be considered a minority as if you're including the entire world's population. And any Yah-fearing man, like me, knows that that would never be the case because there's only one way to the Father. So let's rule that scenario out altogether, okay? Because again, only 1/3 will remain faithful to Father this time around. Say, wouldn't 1/3 of a whole be the minority? Anyhow, so let's say those under the altar are the majority, for argument's sake. Then why are those removed from the planet as in the first fruit elect, considering there is only a small faction of the entire world included within it, according to Revelation 14, not to be mistaken for Revelation 7. That's a completely separate 144,000 group who was sealed on the earth, but never removed before body death. Not that you'll ever hear the church admit that. In any case, could the minority be the very people they're berating for believing in their soul that Sherry Shriner was Father's mouthpiece on earth during these last generation of man? I mean, that would make a lot of sense, right? Considering most people had reacted to her the same way these commenters have. So that would mean they, as part of the majority, is in the wrong group. But we know that is never the case, right? I mean, how could it be when everybody follows the masses for a specific reason? Oh, what is that reason again? Is it in order to not stand out and just to go with the flow and blend in with the majority because they're afraid to be the butt of a joke for not taking the narrow road less traveled, so they ultimately stay on the wide road to destruction? Is that why? Or is it for another reason? Like most, they're narrow-minded and only believe what our trusty government tells them to believe because that's what their parents told them was the case, and it's been handed down from generation to generation until it becomes the quote-unquote truth. Sure, they'll probably have a witty retort to this video. I wouldn't expect anything different from the majority. After all, they are never the minority who is willing to stick their neck out and say something that isn't exactly a popular belief. What they don't know, though, is the popular belief is popular for a reason, and that's because of mind control. Not that they'll believe anything I've said, but I'm saying it anyway. Now, why would that be, knowing the backlash it's invariably going to bring? Why indeed? God bless.